The desert has a way of keeping secrets. Long, cruel secrets buried beneath miles of wind-blown sand. As the sun began to fall behind the red cliffs of Arizona Territory, a lone rider moved slow through the heat shimmer, his horse's hooves sinking into the dust like tired sighs. His name was Eli Mercer, a man once known for his quick draw and quicker temper, but time had dulled the fire in him. These days, he was just a drifter with a past no one cared to ask about. He rode where the wind pointed, chasing no man and no dream, just the quiet. That evening, as the wind began to shift, he saw something glinting by a dry creek bed, something small, half buried in the sand. He dismounted, the old leather of his saddle creaking, and knelt beside it. It was a ring, a simple gold band, worn smooth by time. Eli turned it over in his fingers, brushing off the grit, and that's when he saw the bones. Half covered, twisted by time and wind, the skeleton of a woman lay beneath him. Her dress faded to rags and her bones white as moonlight. The ring still clung to her finger. For a long moment, he didn't move. The desert had seen plenty of death, but this felt different, like the land itself was whispering her story, begging him to listen. He stood, took off his hat, and said softly, "Who were you, ma'am? And who left you out here to die?" The sun dipped low, and a cold wind blew over the dunes. In the distance he saw the faint outline of smoke, a ranch maybe 5 miles north. He decided to ride there, the ring still in his hand, its weight somehow heavier than gold had any right to be. The Red Mesa Ranch looked like it had seen better days. The barn roof sagged and the corral was nearly empty. A woman stepped out onto the porch as Eli rode up, tall, mid-30s maybe, with a rifle in one hand and suspicion in her eyes. "State your business," she called out, her voice sharp. "Name's Eli Mercer," he said, tipping his hat. "Found something out by Dry Creek. Figured someone might want to know who she was." She didn't lower the rifle. "Found who?" He opened his hand and showed her the ring. Her face changed. Not much, but enough. Her eyes flickered, her mouth parting just a little. "Where'd you say you found it?" she asked, her tone suddenly hushed. "Dry Creek, about 4 miles south," Eli said. "She was laying half buried. Could have been out there for years." The woman stepped down slowly from the porch, her boots crunching in the gravel. "That ring. It belonged to my sister," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the gold band. "Martha Lane." Eli felt something cold settle in his gut. "You sure?" "I'd know it anywhere," she said, her voice trembling. She disappeared 8 years ago. Rode off one night after a fight with her husband. Folks said she ran away, but I knew she wouldn't." Eli studied her face, the raw grief etched into it. "Your husband still around?" The woman looked toward the barn, her jaw tightening. "He's out back. Name's Jonas Lane. He runs what's left of this place." A long, heavy silence stretched between them. Finally, she said, "You'd better come inside. There's more to this than you think." Inside, the house smelled of old coffee and horses. A storm lantern flickered on the table, casting long shadows. Eli sat while the woman poured him a cup, her hands trembling slightly. She said her name was Clara Lane, and she'd been running the ranch mostly alone since her sister's disappearance. Jonas, she explained, wasn't the same man he used to be. "He took to drinking after Martha vanished," Clara said, her voice low. "Said she left him. Said she was restless. But I never believed it. She loved this land, even when it broke her heart." Eli turned the ring in his hand again, feeling its history. "And no one ever found a trace of her?" Clara shook her head. "We searched for weeks. The sheriff said maybe she was taken by bandits or lost in a storm. But every time the wind blows from the south, I swear I can still hear her calling." Just then, the door creaked open behind them. Heavy boots crossed the wooden floor. Jonas Lane was a broad man with gray in his beard and whiskey in his eyes. He froze when he saw the ring on the table. For a heartbeat, something like fear crossed his face. "Where'd you get that?" he rasped, his voice rough. Eli met his gaze. Found it where a woman's bones have been sleeping a long time. Jonas's jaw worked, his eyes darting toward Clara. You trying to stir up ghosts, stranger? Just trying to bring one home, Eli said quietly. Jonas slammed his fist on the table, making the lamp tremble. You don't know what you're meddling with. Clara stood, her voice shaking but strong. Then why don't you tell him, Jonas? Tell him what you did. For a moment, the ranch house was silent but for the wind pushing against the shutters. Jonas turned, his hand trembling near his belt buckle. You best leave, Mercer. Ain't no good comes from digging up the past. Eli rose slowly, his eyes steady. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Jonas's eyes flicked to the revolver on Eli's hip, then to the ring. And then, as the wind howled across the plain, Jonas said something that turned the air to ice. She wasn't supposed to die that night. Clara's breath caught in her throat. What did you say? Jonas looked away, his broad shoulders sinking under some invisible weight. It was an accident. I swear it was. Eli stepped forward, the light from the lantern flickering across his determined face. What happened out there, Jonas? But before the rancher could answer, the horses outside began to scream. Wild and terrified, Jonas's eyes widened. God help us, he whispered. They're coming again. Eli turned toward the door, his hand already on his gun. Who's coming? Jonas looked at him, his face pale as ash. The men who buried her. Thanks for watching. This story is just getting started, so if you want to find out what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss a thing. We'll see you in the next one. The wind howled through the broken boards of the old ranch house, a lonely sound that promised a storm. Inside, a single lantern threw flickering, nervous shadows against the wall. On the porch, Eli Mercer stood watch, his hand resting near the revolver at his side. He wasn't a man given to flights of fancy, but the air felt heavy tonight, charged with something more than just rain. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. There, on the far trail, a plume of dust was rising, fighting against the coming downpour. As lightning split the sky, 3 riders took shape in the distance, their figures like ghostly silhouettes against the electric flash. From inside the house, Clara's voice trembled with a fear that had been building for days. That's them, isn't it? Before Eli could answer, Jonas Lane stumbled into the doorway, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked like a man staring down his own ghost. Ain't seen those devils in years, he muttered, his voice a dry rasp. Eli's gaze never left the approaching riders. He asked quietly, his voice a low rumble beneath the wind. Who are they? Jonas swallowed hard, the sound loud in the tense quiet. The Caro brothers. The name hung in the air like a curse. For a fleeting moment the scene shifted. A memory of rough men laughing around a campfire, whiskey bottles glinting in the firelight, their faces cruel even in mirth. Then, just as quickly, we're back on the porch as thunder rolls, shaking the very foundations of the house. The 3 riders reined in their horses about 20 paces from the porch. The man in the lead, a brute with cold eyes and a sneer that seemed permanently etched on his face, called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness. Evenin', Jonas. A close-up on Jonas's hand reveals it, shaking uncontrollably as it grips the doorframe. He found his voice, though it was thin and reedy. Why are you here, Clay? Clay Caro let out a harsh laugh that scraped the air. You always did talk too much when you drink, old friend. His eyes slid from Jonas to the silent figure of Eli Mercer. Hired yourself a gun? Eli didn't flinch. He stood his ground, the wind whipping his long coat around him, his hand resting casually on the butt of his Colt. There was a coiled stillness about him, the quiet danger of a patient predator. Clay swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the dirt with a thud. The pretense of friendship was gone, replaced by a raw, menacing sneer. You found her, didn't you? The question was an accusation, and it hit Jonas like a physical blow. He whispered, his voice cracking with a guilt that was years old. "I didn't mean for her to die." Clay's face twisted into a snarl. "Shut your mouth." The air grew thick, suffocating. Another flash of lightning illuminated the four men, freezing them in a tableau of imminent violence. "Ain't nobody was supposed to find her," Clay said, his voice dropping to a cold, flat tone. That's when Eli finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it cut through the tension with the hardness of steel. "That deal's over." Clay's grin returned, this time laced with mockery. "And who are you to say? You the law?" Eli met his gaze without blinking. "No," he said simply. "Just a man tired of watching good folks rot." For the first time, Clay's smile faltered. The easy confidence in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "You got one chance to ride on out of here," he warned, his hand inching toward his own gun. Eli slowly removed his hat. He glanced down at the small, tarnished ring nestled in the palm of his hand, the object that had started this whole sorry affair. Looking back up at Clay, his decision was made. "Reckon I already made my choice." A profound silence fell, so complete that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Clay's hand twitched. It was the only invitation Eli needed. Faster than the eye could follow, Eli's hand blurred into motion. His Colt was out and firing before Clay's gun had even cleared its holster. The explosion of gunfire shattered the night. Clay Caro crumpled to the dirt without a sound. His two brothers, shocked into action, dove for cover behind their spooked horses as bullets tore through the dusk. Eli moved just as fast, diving behind a wooden water trough as return fire splintered the air around him. He raised his pistol, aimed, and fired two quick, precise shots. Two thuds, followed by the settling of dust. Silence. The remaining horses, panicked, bolted into the darkness. Eli rose slowly, holstering his weapon, a thin wisp of smoke drifting from the barrel. On the porch, Jonas sank onto the steps, the strength finally leaving his legs. "God forgive me," he choked out. Clara rushed to his side, her own fear momentarily forgotten. "Tell him, Jonas. Tell him everything." Jonas lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a terrible sorrow. "We was fighting that night," he began, his voice barely a whisper. The world dissolved into a memory of a dark, rainy night. Martha, his wife, running from the house, her face a mask of anger and hurt. He remembered her mounting her horse and galloping away into the storm. He chased after her, screaming her name into the wind, but it was no use. In his memory, the horse stumbled in the mud. Martha was thrown hard. He knelt beside her still form, crying out her name, but she didn't answer, and that's when they appeared out of the darkness, like vultures drawn to tragedy, Clay Caro and his brothers. "They'll hang you for this," Clay had said, his voice grim. "No one'll believe it was an accident." Jonas, broken and terrified, had shaken his head, unable to think, unable to breathe. And so, by the dim, flickering light of a lantern, they had buried her. He remembered the wind blowing sand across her pale face one last time before they covered her over. Back in the present, Clara's tears fell freely. "You let me think she ran off with someone else. All these years." Jonas's voice was a ragged whisper. I thought it was a mercy, for both of us." Eli stared out into the dark, his face a hard mask. "You'll tell the sheriff," he stated. It wasn't a question. Jonas nodded weakly, a broken man. "I will." Suddenly, the sharp crack of a rifle split the night. Jonas jerked forward, a dark stain blooming on his chest. The lantern he'd been holding fell from his grasp, its oil spilling and igniting the dry wood of the porch. Fire spread with terrifying speed. Clara screamed. Eli reacted instantly, grabbing her and pulling her behind the flimsy cover of the porch rail as another shot whizzed past their heads. He saw it then, a muzzle flash high up on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Wasting no time, Eli grabbed his own rifle from where it leaned against the house, dropped to one knee, and took aim. He squeezed the trigger twice, his shots steady and true. The flash on the ridge died. Silence returned, broken only by the grumbling of the distant storm and the roar of the spreading fire. Eli ran back to Jonas, but the flames were everywhere. He managed to drag the older man away from the worst of it, but it was too late. Jonas's life was fading fast. Tell her I'm sorry," he whispered with his last breath, and then he was still. Behind them, the fire consumed the house, a funeral pyre against the dark sky. By dawn, all that remained was a pile of smoldering ash where the ranch had stood. Clara sat huddled in a blanket, staring blankly at the horizon. Eli finished his work, burying Jonas in a simple grave by the barn. Farther out, 3 other fresh mounds of dirt marked the final resting place of the Caro brothers. Clara held up the ring, turning it over and over in her trembling hands. "You think she'll find peace now?" she asked softly. Eli swung himself up onto his horse. "Maybe," he said, his gaze fixed on the southern trail. "Maybe she will, if the whole truth finally does." Clara looked up at him, her eyes finding a new strength. "Then finish hers," she whispered, a plea and a command. Eli tipped his hat in acknowledgement and rode south, a lone figure against the rising sun. Later, the desert wind blew across the lonely, shallow grave where Martha had first been buried. Eli knelt there once more. He looked down at the disturbed earth and whispered, "You can rest now, ma'am." For a moment, the wind sighed gently around him, almost like a voice answering. Then a shadow fell across him. He wasn't alone. A woman's voice, clear and sharp, cut through the quiet. "Did he tell you everything?" Eli turned slowly, his eyes widening in disbelief at the figure standing behind him. The wind sings a lonely song across the dunes, a melody as old as the desert itself. Here, in the vast, unforgiving emptiness, Eli Mercer stands, a man etched by sun and sorrow. His hand hovers near his gun, a familiar, cold comfort in a world that offers little else. The silence is broken by a whisper, carried on the breeze. A hooded figure emerges from the heat haze, her form a mirage-given substance. The sun glints off her cheek as she speaks again, her voice a low, urgent hum. "I asked if he told you everything." Eli's instinct screams, his hand clenching the grip of his pistol. But something in her stillness, in the quiet authority of her voice, makes him pause. He lets his hand fall. With a slow, deliberate movement, she pulls back her hood. Mary Holt, a name from a buried past. A ghost walking in the daylight. Eli's eyes narrow, searching her face for the truth he's been chasing. "Jonas lied about a lot of things," she says, her words cutting through the desert air. She gestures to the ground, to the disturbed earth and the half-buried bones of a forgotten grave. The wind stirs the dust, a mournful shroud over the shallow resting place. Mary kneels, her movements fluid and sorrowful. She brushes sand from a collection of stones with a ringed finger. "I was here the night Martha died," she whispers, the confession hanging heavy between them. Eli shakes his head, disbelief warring with the grim reality at his feet. "He said it was an accident." A tremor runs through Mary's hands, a physical manifestation of the memory she's held captive for so long. The desert sun fades, replaced by the flickering lantern light of a barn, years ago. A young Martha Lane, her face set with determination, is packing a bag. She's leaving. But Jonas, her brother, storms in, his face a mask of fury. He grabs her. She resists, pushing him away. In a flash of rage, he strikes her. She falls, a sickening thud echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. From the shadows of the hayloft, a younger Mary watches, a helpless witness to the tragedy. Panic sets in as Clay Caro and his brothers appear, their arrival sealing Martha's fate. They help Jonas carry her away, burying her and the truth under the desert stars. Back in the present, tears trace paths through the dust on Mary's cheeks. Eli's jaw is tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. The silence is a crushing weight. I begged him to tell the truth. Mary's voice trails off, lost to the wind that sweeps across the grave. After a long moment, Eli speaks, his voice rough with emotion. She deserves better than this. Mary's fingers brush across the sandy earth, a final, tender touch. That's why I came back. A slow nod from Eli. An understanding passes between them, forged in shared grief. The silence returns, heavy and aching. Mary hesitates, the next question a burden on her tongue. Jonas, is he? Eli's gaze is steady. He's gone. Took a bullet meant for me. Mary looks down, a sad, bitter truth settling in her expression. He always said that, she whispers. Too late, under the high desert sun, near a gnarled mesquite tree, Eli carves a name into a piece of cedar. Martha Lane. Mary lays a small bunch of wildflowers, impossibly vibrant against the muted earth, over the newly mounded grave. The camera lingers on the fresh carving. Beloved sister. Wronged, but remembered. You've done more for her than anyone else ever did, Mary says, her voice thick with gratitude. Eli just shrugs, uncomfortable with the praise. Just seemed like the right thing. The wind tugs at Mary's hair as she watches him. There's a quiet strength about him, a stillness that's different from the hardened men she's known. You're not like most men I've known, she observes. A faint, rare smile touches Eli's lips. Ain't sure if that's a compliment or a warning. Mary's soft laugh is a welcome sound in the desolate landscape. A little of both. They mount their horses and ride north, two solitary figures against the rolling red earth and scrub brush. As the miles pass, Mary glances at Eli, a question in her eyes. She asks him why. Why he helps strangers. Why he seeks out stories that aren't his to finish. For a long time, Eli is quiet, his gaze distant. Then he tells her about Anna, his late wife. He speaks of letters she never got to send, of stories left unfinished, a life cut short. He rides, he explains, to honor her memory, to finish the stories for those who can't. Mary listens, a soft, understanding smile on her face. Maybe, she says gently, you're just finding your way home. The setting sun bathes the landscape in warm, golden light as they arrive at the dusty outpost of Red Mesa town. Lamplight glows from behind grimy windows, a beacon in the falling dusk. Eli dismounts and walks straight into the sheriff's office. He lays Mary's ring and a written confession on the worn wooden desk. The sheriff, a man weathered by years of frontier justice, looks up, surprised. The story's finished, Eli says. Make sure folks know who she really was. The sheriff leans back in his chair. You ridin' on after this? Eli offers a half smile, the familiar answer on his lips. Always do. But before he can turn to leave, Mary steps beside him. Maybe not this time, she says, her voice quiet but firm. Their eyes meet, and in that shared glance a subtle, unspoken hope flickers to life. Eli hesitates, then tips his hat. We'll see, ma'am. We'll see. Dawn breaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Eli rides out of town, alone. The desert stretches before him, endless and inviting. He stops on a high ridge and looks back. In the distance, a lone figure stands waving. It's Mary, the morning light catching in her hair. And for the first time in years, a real, genuine smile spreads across Eli Mercer's face. He reaches into his saddlebag and pulls out a small, tarnished ring. Anna's ring. He slips it onto his finger. Rest easy, Anna, he whispers to the wind. Then he spurs his horse forward, riding toward the wide horizon. Some stories don't end where they begin. Some just ride on, carried in the hearts of men who remember. And somewhere, in the quiet, forgotten places of the West, a soul has finally found its peace. A peace that comes, not in the ending of a story, but in the remembering of it.